Hey friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Thanks for joining me back at my craft room today for some Pretty Pink Posh inspiration. And I'm excited to share with you how I created this festive Happy New Year card. The supplies that I'll be using today are the Happy New Year stamp set and coordinating dies, the balloon number stamp set and its coordinating dies. I have the layered music notes stencil, and I'll also be using my stitch torn rectangle dies, and I also use the eyelet rectangle dies. I have already had some cardstock that I picked out from my stash. I have that pretty kind of jewel tone green trimmed down already to A2 to fit on my A2 card base. And I use the largest eyelet rectangle die to cut out from the blue cardstock. I have this kind of cream colored cardstock that I'm going to be doing my stenciling on. So I'm just going to get my setup here using my stencil mat and my grip mat. And I will be using all three layers of the layered music note stencil pack. And I'm going to do them in order. So starting with A, I'll get that centered onto my cream colored cardstock. And I will be ink blending or adding ink with my dome foamed ink applicators and three different color distress oxides. So the three colors I'm going to be using are aged mahogany, tattered rose, and Victorian velvet. So for the A stencil, I'm starting with Victorian velvet, and I'll just be adding ink through those music notes onto my cardstock. Now the dome foam blenders sometimes don't always get into those little crevices, so make sure you're gentle with your stencil, but keep adding that ink to make sure you're getting it through those music notes. I would probably recommend maybe using brushes if you have brushes for your distress oxides. So after I finish the A stencil, I'm applying the B stencil, and then I will grab Tattered Rose. These are the larger music notes, so I wanted to use the lightest color for these as I was trying to go for a more subtle background, just using nice pink and peachy pink tones. I thought those would go really nicely with the deeper jewel tones of the cardstock of that darker green and blue that I used for the background and the card base. So after I finish the B stencil, I have C, and I'm going through with aged mahogany again, really trying to get into all parts of those music notes before I pull off my stencil. And I love a good stencil reveal. So now that we are all done with all three layers, here is the background. Again, I really liked the subtle and just the pops of those pink, coming off in different areas of that background. And I'm going to add a little bit of watercolor. So this is the Starry Colors pigment, and I'm going to use Champagne Gold. Again, trying to get that peachy pink color going on. And once I added some water to my watercolor, I'm just using a fine paintbrush, and I am splattering that onto my background. Now I did wipe my paper and kind of smeared a couple of my music notes, and I was really sad about it, but luckily this background is just a background, and I'm going to be adding some images later on when I assemble the card. So I'll go ahead and set that aside to dry, and once it's dry, I use the second largest of the stitch torn rectangle dies to cut it out. So now we're going to move into stamping my images. I pulled out a few of the images from the Happy New Year set. I have the champagne bottle, one of the little party horns, and the clinking glasses. And then I also use the balloons to stamp 2024 and some strings. So I was trying to have, again, a kind of rose gold champagne color look to this card. So the colors that I use for my Mylar balloons, I started with YR148 to be the darkest tone, and then my medium tone was Y145. So I added the darker outline, but I'm trying not to go to the edge of the image. I just want to go a little bit on the inside, and then I use that medium tone to bring that color out. And now my lighter tone is YR220, and I'm completely coloring in my balloon. Now these are Ohuhu art markers. They are alcohol-based markers, and I have a white colored pencil where I went through the center of the letter to try to really highlight and bring out a light look, like a shiny look to my balloon. And then I have a glitter brush marker. This particular one is from scrapbook.com, and it's a tan colored glitter brush marker, but you could use clear just as easily. And I completely covered all of my balloons so they have a shiny look to them. And I use that same color combination for the champagne in my glasses and the champagne kind of coming out of my champagne bottle. Now for the bottle itself, I wanted to use green, so I'm using a color combination that I thought would match pretty well with that dark green cardstock in the background. And I'm starting with the darkest color of BG2 and adding in all of the dark shadows of my champagne bottle. And very similar to how I color the balloons, I didn't go to the edge because I wanted my bottle to look round and have a highlight around the edge of my bottle. So after that dark color, I'm bringing in my mid-tone, which is BG1, and I'm just going over that darker color and bringing it out, but still trying to leave a white center. So when I grab my final color, BG5, I will completely color in that bottle. So the highlights that are in the center of the bottle as well as the edges. Again, I just think having that look of having a light all the way to the edge of the bottle as well as the center just makes it look more round and reflective. So I'm going to completely color in the rest of my green champagne bottle, and then I'll start with the next color combination. I did go out of the lines a little bit, but not to worry, that's what a white gel pen is for. And later on, I'll go ahead and cover up those times I went out of the lines with my white gel pen. Now the next color combination was the cork of my champagne bottle, which was E220, E210, and E170. I used the two lighter colors to color in the cork and then the darkest color to add texture to again try to make it look like a cork is popping out of the champagne bottle. I used B220 to color in my champagne glasses, again just as a dark shadow, and then used a clear colorless blender to color and spread that color out through the rest of the champagne glass. For my party horn, I wanted to bring in those pinks from my stenciled background. So I'm going to be using four colors to kind of color in the party horn and some of the details on my champagne bottle. And those four colors are R290, R280, and then I did R282 and R270 to just have, two different kind of tones of the same color family on my party horn and my champagne bottle. And then I wanted to bring in a little bit more of a peach color. So I'm starting with E030 on the label of my champagne bottle, trying to follow the same kind of look that I did with the greens. And then I brought in R20 to be my mid-tone and to bring some of that color out. And finally R18 to completely color in the rest of that champagne bottle. So after that, all of my images are colored. I'm going to use a white gel pen to add some highlights to my images as well as covering any times I went out of the lines. And I'll also use it on, all my images. So my balloons, my party horn, my champagne glasses. And then after that, I will use the coordinating dies for both of the stamp sets to cut them out. I do use some repositionable tape to hold the dies in place and run it through my die cut machine. So now I have everything pretty much just ready to go now to layer my card together. So before I start gluing, I know that I need to add my sentiment. So I'm going to use the Happy New Year from the Happy New Year stamp set. And I wanted to emboss it in gold just to really tie in with the rest of the champagne color that I have on my card. So I'm going to use my anti-static powder because I did use Distress Oxides. And while it is dry now, sometimes embossing powder can stick to those pigment inks. So adding some anti-static powder will make sure that when I stamp with my embossing ink, the embossing powder will only stick to that. So I went ahead and figured out my placement of my sentiment, and I'm using a clear embossing ink in my little Misty and a stamping tool, like a pressure tool, to get that ink onto that stenciled background. And then I have some ultra fine gold embossing powder. I like to use ultra fine for sentiments because I want to make sure that my sentiments are very clear and easy to read by the card receiver. And I'll completely cover that sentiment up with the powder. While I pick up the powder, I'm going to warm up my embossing heat gun, and I'll go ahead and melt that embossing powder down. Embossing powder is pretty much like little tiny pieces of plastic, so heating it up melts it and it will stay on your cardstock. So now it's time to start gluing. I'm going to grab my tape runner and I'm going to start by adhering this piece of green cardstock to my card base. I have a top folding A2 card base, and this green paper comes from an A2 paper pad, so it's already sized and ready to go onto that card base. I'm going to add adhesive behind my eyelet rectangle die cut piece of blue cardstock and just centering that to the background. I wanted to pop up the next layer, so I'm adding some foam adhesive behind my stitched torn rectangle die cut. Again, this was stenciled with the layered music notes, and I'm going to add that to the center of the card. To add in my images, I'm going to first figure out my balloons, and I'm going to adhere those to my stenciled background with liquid adhesive, but I want to make sure I know the placement before I start gluing them down. So I'm going to start with adding the balloon strings behind each of the letters. I try to flip the direction of the string and kind of alternate the way that it's pointed and coming out of the balloon so that they all look kind of random, even though it's the same stamped string for all 4 balloons. I just feel like it gives them a little bit more of a personality, I guess, that, they're moving around with the balloons. And I'm trying to do my best to center it with my card, but I want it to kind of peek up off the top of that torn rectangle so they look like they're floating. And once I have a good placement, I'm using some repositionable tape to pick up all of the number balloons, and then I'll add my liquid adhesive behind the strings and the balloons and glue it to my card base. I'm going to make sure that those strings and balloons are really pressed down and that glue is starting to dry so they're nice and adhered to the card base before I start pulling up my repositionable tape. So I'll slowly pull it up, make sure the balloons are staying in place, and that will finish off what I am going to add with liquid adhesive for these stamped images. I play around with the layout and I finally settle on how I want my champagne bottle and my glasses and my party horn all to look like. And once I have those figured out, I'm going to use that same foam adhesive to add to the back of all of these images. I'm going to pull off the release paper on each one and add them to where I had them placed when I did my kind of dry run of how I wanted my card to look. So I started with the champagne bottle and then I moved on to the champagne glasses, trying to do my best to fit them around the sentiment without covering up the 2024 too much and my sentiment. I just wanted my images to really pop off, but you could still obviously read what I want my card receiver to read. So that finishes off adding those images, but we need to add a little bit of bling. So I'm grabbing my matte gold confetti mix. I'm using a jewel picker that has a wax tip end to pick up like the smallest size of the sequin mix. And then I think I added 5 total. And once I had the placement down, I'm using my jewel picker and liquid adhesive to glue all of those down to finish off this Happy New Year card. I hope that you enjoyed this process today. I really like the colors that I picked to create this card, like the pinks and the peach color popping off the jewel tone blue and green. But I hope this brings you some inspiration today and that you're having happy holidays and are excited for the new year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!